Hello and welcome to The World Today. I'm Millicent Walker. First, the headlines. EU accuses Russia of using energy to try and blackmail countries supporting Ukraine, as Russian energy giant cuts gas supplies to Poland and Bulgaria over their refusal to pay in rubles. Pope Francis appeals for constant prayers for peace in Ukraine. And Myanmar sentenced ex-leader Aung San Suu Kyi to jail for corruption. Welcome, everyone. We begin with Russian President Vladimir Putin's demand weeks ago that buyers from unfriendly countries pay for gas in rubles or be cut off, starting from the date payments are due for April, something the European Union rejected at the time. But today, Russia made good its threat and halted gas supplies to Bulgaria and Poland. According to reports, the ruble strengthened today after Russia made the decision, firming to a more than two-year high against the euro in Moscow trade on the prospect of upcoming income tax payments. Poland receives its Russian gas through the Yamal-Europe pipeline from Russia's gas fields in the Arctic, which continues west to supply Germany and other European countries, while Bulgaria is supplied through pipes over Turkey. There's more on the reaction in this report.
Energy giant Gazprom has stopped supplying gas to Poland and Bulgaria in a major escalation of Moscow's broader tension with the West over its invasion of Ukraine. Poland and Bulgaria are the first to have their gas cut off by Europe's main supplier since Russia launched its invasion. But Poland's Prime Minister has said that the country's energy supplies are secure. Speaking during a visit to Berlin, he says Poland had been previously prepared to diversify gas supplies.
We have received such threats from the Russian Federation, from Gazprom. They are related. Inter alia, with the method of payment, Poland sticks to the arrangement, and perhaps Russia will try to punish Poland in this way. As I have emphasized many times, Poland had previously prepared to diversify gas and to obtain gas from various directions. And even before the Baltic gas line is launched, we will be able to protect our economy, protect households, people, Poles, against such a dramatic step by Russia.
Meanwhile, Russia's announcement of shutting off gas supplies to Bulgaria over demands to change the payment scheme is a grave breach of a current contract and amounts to blackmail. That's according to the Bulgarian Prime Minister, Kirill Petkov. At a press briefing in Sofia today, Petkov says Bulgaria was currently reviewing all of its contracts with Gazprom, including for transit of Russian gas to Serbia and Hungary, because one-sided blackmail was not acceptable.
The suspension of gas supplies from Gazprom is a gross violation of their contract and is blackmail for using a non-contractual plan for payment in rubles through third parties. We do not guarantee either the supply or the money of the Bulgarians. We will not succumb to such a racket. Bulgaria is also reviewing all agreements with Gazprom, including the agreement on transit through Bulgaria, because one-sided blackmail is not acceptable.
As all trade and legal relations have been respected, it is clear that natural gas is currently being used more as a political and economic weapon in the form of a war rather than a legal trade. In terms of legal and trade relations, the Bulgarian side has absolutely no violations.
Meanwhile, in Germany, Minister Robert Habeck says Germany is preparing for a change of control at the PCK refinery in Schwedt, operated by Russian state-owned Rosneft, which accounts for all of Germany's remaining Russian oil imports.
In the case of gas, we're in the process of going full speed at building a new energy infrastructure. The LNG terminals that will then bring liquefied gas to Germany so that we no longer need Russian gas and pipeline gas. It takes a little longer to build up a new infrastructure, but we're making very, very good progress there.
Germany has set out plans to become independent of Russian oil, which will make a European Union oil embargo manageable for Europe's biggest economy.
Oil and gas expert and chairman of Shoreline Natural Resource, Mr. Kola Karim, joins us now on the program from Saudi Arabia. Thanks for joining us. Russia appears to have made good its threat. Were you expecting it to get to this?
Thank you for having me. This is where the world is not expecting to find itself. This is now getting very serious, and it's a dangerous position to be in. Why? Because Bulgaria, 90% of Bulgaria's gas comes from Russia. We have 50% of Polish gas comes from Russia. And this is very substantial. But the biggest elephant that I see in the room is actually Germany. That's got 35% of its gas utilization coming from Russia. And this is the largest European economy in itself. So these are dangerous times, and we're in very uncharted territories. We should all be very worried, looking at where the world economy is going.
It's also interesting, we've heard the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen responding, saying that Russia's decision to halt supplies to those countries is an aggressive move, and, you know, the EU considers it as a sort of blackmail. But she also said that there will be the least possible impact on European consumers. But do you think there's perhaps a shock absorber, a sort of contingency plan that the EU would be taking in light of this?
I think everyone's bluffing. We're all pandering and utilization of soft and hard power. The functionality situation is this: the contractual obligation on Russia is in euros. By pulling that, the Europeans have put sanctions on Russian financial institutions, which means if I sell you gas as Russia, I can't get euros. So Russia has turned it on them by saying, listen, I now want payment from this certain date in rubles, which again will be flouting the sanction position put in place. So it's a very dicey position that we see in an uncharted territory that we and the global economy has never been before, because we are going to see economies stagnating right across Europe because of this, because energy is actually in the core of every production facility in an economy like Germany and these producing nations.
On a breach of agreement, which we've heard, unilateral breach from Bulgaria, is this one between Gazprom and the countries? I mean, at the end of this, do you see a breach in terms of, you know, litigation, seeing as the stand Russia has taken?
I'm sure in a contract and validity of contracts like this, there will be arbitration clauses and clauses for dealing with such disputes. But the problem is bigger than this. You cannot, when we're talking about gas supplies to nations, wait for dispute resolution clause to fall in place. You need the gas. Some of these countries are still going through very cold moments. Winter is still there, just sipping into the spring. So we're still talking consumption is still expected to be very high in a lot of these economies. So dispute resolution is not going to resolve it. I think people need to start being serious, sit around the table and discussing what is factual from what is fiction in this dispute between Ukraine and Russia and the European Union.
How much more role do you think the U.S. can come in to sort of save the day? Because when Russia made this threat back then, it did say that it would, you know, bring out some of its oil for some of these countries. The UK as well is also slightly affected by this, isn't it?
Look, you could hear from the German energy minister what he's just said. Germany is trying to wean itself by the PK refinery, one, to find a change of control so they stop consuming Russian oil. But the biggest problem for Germany is building infrastructure. Building an LNG terminal is not something you do in 3 to 6 months. So the problem is it's an immediate one, but the solution is a medium to longer term solution. So this is going to affect everyone across board, and people have to start sitting around the table having really real frank discussions that will create a lasting solution that would help a lot of people. Look, a lot of economies that we see today in Europe is in a tailspin. The recession is real. What's going to happen? Because a lot of industrial growth in Germany, which is the largest European economy, is already stagnating, and we're going to negative territory soon if this threat continues the way it is. Look, one thing to look at coming out of all this is where countries in Africa like Nigeria should fall into play. We, as a nation, should start taking this very seriously, that investing into our gas reserves and exportation and exploitation of our gas reserves will be a very, very good and interesting position for the Nigerian economy going forward. Look at Algeria. Algeria today is supplying 8% of European gas consumption. Imagine Nigeria with 212 TCF of gas, but being able to join that bandwagon.
Some would say that it would also take us many months to get to that point where we can supply and meet this gap.
There is no doubt. There is no doubt. Be rest assured. But one thing is, Rome was not built in a day, but you must start building Rome one day. Nigeria has an opportunity now in trying to fill up some of the gaps there. Even after the falling out between Russia and Ukraine, the Europeans have realized something. Russia using energy and energy security as a weapon of gas supply, restricting gas supply. Should this and would this happen again? No. So everyone's looking for alternate supply source, and Nigeria, looking at the proximity to Europe, is in a first call advantage in doing so.
Mr. Kola Karim, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Oil and gas expert, chairman, Shoreline Natural Resource. Thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, airstrikes have hit regions in Ukraine, Russia, Moldova in the last 24 hours. According to Russia's Belgorod mayor, an arms depot near the village of Straya Neldovka from Ukraine was struck in the early hours of today. Meanwhile, the Russian-backed government of Moldova's breakaway Transnistria region accused Ukraine of firing shots into the region. Here's more on the situation.
Mariupol residents waited in long queues to register for their pensions in the devastated port city, with many of those who remain in the city running out of money. The southern Ukrainian city, once home to 400,000 people, has been a scene of fierce fighting between the Russian and Ukrainian forces. The pensions are said to be distributed by the administration of the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic. In the past week, Ukraine's Armed Forces Operations Command said its forces in Donetsk and Luhansk regions had repulsed 63 Russian attacks and destroyed 55 tanks and dozens more vehicles, including 13 tanks over the last 24 hours. Russia said on Tuesday it pummeled Ukraine with missiles, aircraft and artillery overnight, killing at least 560 Ukrainian fighters and destroying dozens of armored vehicles, rocket systems and other military equipment. Over in Odessa, according to the city council, Russian missiles struck and damaged a strategic bridge across the Dniester Liman in the region. Ukrainian police released a video on Tuesday showing damages to the bridge and rescuers clearing the debris and repairing the electric lines. The head of Ukraine's railway company said no railway workers had been hurt. The railway bridge in Zataka is a key connection between Odessa's region south to the rest of Ukraine. Meanwhile, today Russia's defense ministry said Kalibr missiles had struck an arms depot in Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia region, housing weapons from the United States and European countries. The ministry, which said its air force had destroyed 59 Ukrainian military targets overnight, said the missiles had destroyed hangars with a large consignment of foreign weapons and ammunition supplied to Ukrainian troops by the United States and European countries.
For more on what's what's happening there. VOA's Anna Chernikova joins us now from Kyiv. Hello, Anna, and thanks for joining us. Anna, first off, gas supplies were cut off to Poland, Bulgaria. Are there any reactions in Ukraine today?
Hello. Well, we don't have any official reactions yet. However, President Zelensky has already said previously that Russia will use and is going definitely to use energy sources as a certain weapon to blackmail countries and to, trying to bring the economy on the flow, the Russian economy. So I think that this is kind of for Ukraine and for Ukrainian officials. This was kind of an expected step. The main message that the Ukrainian government already expressed is that European countries and countries around the world that use Russian gas and oil should definitely think of certain alternative sources and should put an embargo on all the oil and gas from Russia. So I think this is the main official message that we have so far, and in terms of reaction, not yet, but probably is coming.
And talk to us about the strikes which have hit regions in Ukraine, and then we understand Russia as well, and then Moldova in the last 24 hours.
If we talk about Ukraine, there are very heavy battles going on along the whole front line. So if you look from the east, it basically goes from northeast down to southeast. Very heavy and intensifying battles. During the day-to-day, Ukrainian officials announced that there are clearly more movements from Russian forces by the end of the day, but the battles are going on, so there are no territories that have been heavily occupied or anything like that. So the fightings are going on. A lot of airstrikes from Russian side, a lot of shelling from Russian side, and especially the city of Mariupol is constantly under the shelling again. Kramatorsk again under the aviation shelling. So situation is very tough, mostly east and south. And also the Zaporizhia region, which appears to be a certain, corridor in between and a little bit to the west of eastern part. So this is what we have so far for the moment. If we talk about Transnistria region in Moldova, Ukrainian officials had a press conference just a couple of hours ago and highlighted again that Ukraine has nothing to do with what is happening on the territory of Transnistria. What we know for sure that it was attack on the so-called defense ministry of Transnistria and on the building itself, and the weapons that have been used, which was found on the site, is the weapon that Ukraine has not in its operation. So it looks like, and Ukrainian officials see it as a provocation from either Russian side, from the Russian side and from the internal forces in Transnistria itself. So we'll see how it's gonna change and what's gonna happen next. But again, Ukraine denied any involvement in that. If we look to the, Russian, very quickly.
Okay, quickly, go ahead, Anna.
Just very quickly. So Russian territory, there are explosions on the at the military infrastructure. So it's oil depot, military storages, and train station, railways. All the explosions happen at the assets which are used by Russian forces in this war with Ukraine.
Thank you, Anna. VOA's Anna Chernikova there for us in Kyiv. We appreciate you for your reporting. Thanks.
Thank you.
Pope Francis again appealed for an end to the war in Ukraine, holding his general audience a day after a fresh flare-up of knee pain forced him to abruptly cancel all activities. Francis arrived in St. Peter's Square sitting in an open Pope mobile, which drove him to just behind a platform facing the crowd of several thousand. He walked slowly and with a pronounced limp while holding the arm of an aide to his seat about 10 meters away. Addressing one group during the audience, he asked for prayers for an end to the war in Ukraine, which he says he has condemned often in the past 2 months since Russia launched its invasion. According to him, may the weapons fall silent so that those who have the power to stop the war hear the cry for peace coming from all of humanity. Kharkiv resident violinist Vera Litovchenko started playing her instrument after she'd seen one of her students cheering up people in a metro station. With Russia's attack on Ukraine, millions of people fled their homes, towns, finding themselves in cellars. Metro stations turned bomb shelters. Well, violinist Vera explained her popularity on the internet, adding that she never wanted to make a show out of it. She said that she never wanted to stage anything. She believes that if people around the world see the situation through her eyes, it will help the Ukrainian cause. Hoping and praying that there is an end to the war. Coming up on The World Today. Prime Minister Boris Johnson faces questions over cost of living prices, tax rises and misogyny. Join us again. Welcome back. A Moscow court has declined to rule on an appeal from a jailed former U.S. Marine who is seeking to overturn a 9-year sentence for an attack on 2 Russian police officers, which he denies. Trevor Reed, 30, from Texas, is serving out his term after being convicted in 2019 of endangering the lives of 2 police officers while drunk on a visit to Moscow. The U.S. has called his trial a theater of the absurd. Moscow's Second Cassation Court said Reed's appeal against his conviction would be first to a lower court so he could familiarize himself with the case materials. This is citing court spokeswoman Dinara Muslimova. The case will be sent back to the court once he has done this. Reed's parents said in March he had gone on hunger strike to protest against being put in solitary confinement, and he had not been receiving proper medical care, despite fears that he had tuberculosis. And a Myanmar court sentenced Aung San Suu Kyi to 5 years in jail for corruption today. Her trial is being held behind closed doors, but according to a source with knowledge of proceedings, the judge handed down the verdict with the moment of the court convening. Suu Kyi had been charged with at least 18 offences, which carry combined maximum jail terms of nearly 190 years if convicted in all. This latest case centered on the allegation that Suu Kyi accepted gold and cash payments from her protege turned accuser, former chief minister of the city of Yangon, Pheu Minh Phuyen. Well, the Nobel laureate has been held in an undisclosed location since early 2021 when she was forced from power by the military coup. It is not clear if Suu Kyi will now be transferred to a prison to serve her sentence. And the leader of the opposition Labour Party, Keir Starmer, has accused British Prime Minister Boris Johnson of not doing enough to address rising inflation and the cost of living pressures in the UK. Starmer said this today during the weekly Prime Minister's questions in Parliament. Inflation hit a 30-year high last month of 7.0%, with the poll suggesting it will be higher this quarter, meaning households are facing the biggest cost of living squeeze since records began in the 1950s, according to Britain's budget forecasters. While facing questions by Starmer in Parliament, Mr. Johnson pointed out that to a rise in inflation globally, he said his government was addressing it by helping consumers with energy costs, among other measures, including a reduction in national insurance contributions.
But this week, millions will look at their payslip and see a tax.
I exchanged messages with the Right Honourable Lady over the weekend, and I repeat what I said to her. There can be absolutely no place for such behaviour or such expression in this House, and we should treat each other, Mr. Speaker, frankly, with the respect that each other deserves.
Next year, Mr. Speaker, the UK is set for the slowest growth and the highest inflation in the G7. Why is he failing to manage the economy?
On his point about the economy, yes, of course it is true that there is a crisis of global inflation around the world, but this government is tackling it with all sorts of ways that you would expect, Mr. Speaker, helping people with the cost of their energy, British energy, far more, by the way, than the Labour will put in, a British energy security strategy to undo the mistakes of previous Labour governments, Mr. Speaker, but above all, making sure that we have the fastest growth in the G7 last year, which would not have been possible if we listened to him.
Well, here on the continent, South Africans are celebrating the 28th year since the first multiracial elections in the country that brought struggle icon Nelson Mandela to power as president. During the apartheid era, black people were not allowed to vote in elections, but 1994 saw all that change. Various events have been held across the country to celebrate, while the Democratic Alliance marked the day in the Eastern Cape. The Economic Freedom Fighters held their rally in Mamelodi near Pretoria. President Cyril Ramaphosa, who led the main celebratory events in Mpumalanga, took his audience through the past, the present challenges, and asked the citizens to choose what kind of nation they would like South Africa to be. He spoke to political correspondent Moletsi Mbeki, who is chairman of the South African Institute for International Affairs, on the picture of the country he sees today, bearing in mind the dreams and aspirations of the majority in 1994.
We had so many dreams in South Africa, and I have a nagging suspicion that they were all very unrealistic because we didn't know what was in the coffers of the South African government. So we thought we could do lots of things, which, of course, once we got into State House or union buildings, we realized the coffers were empty, and there were lots of things that we thought we could do that we were not able to do. Of course, the first priority was to get rid of racial discrimination. That was what the struggle was all about. To install one person, one vote, and to have a democratic system in South Africa. All that has been achieved. So in terms of what we were fighting for, and countries like Nigeria gave us a lot of support, we've achieved that objective. But of course, there are many, many other issues, especially on the economic front, that still have to be addressed.
South Africa, in Africa, is miles ahead still.
Yeah.
What is being done right?
What's being done right in South Africa? Well, a lot of You see, South Africa is dominated by the private sector. South Africa many people look at the government and they think, because in many African countries, government is so dominant. I lived in Zimbabwe for 10 years. I lived in Tanzania for 3 years. I worked in the common market for Eastern and Southern Africa. Governments are dominant in Africa, in the rest of Africa. In South Africa, it's the private sector that's dominant. So, for example, if we take the example of Nigeria, the main investors in Nigeria from South Africa are private companies like MTN, ShopRite, what have you. So what is carrying South Africa is this massive, diversified, relatively well-managed private sector. We have a mature private, let me say, we have a mature private sector in South Africa, which, as I pointed out, is more than 300 years old. It started with the big bad Dutch East India Company, which is what introduced slavery. They were a private company. And they were the ones who started our export agriculture, for example. They set up the wine industry. And the wine industry in South Africa today is thriving. It's our big export industry. They also set up the fruit industry, the wheat. So the private sector in South Africa is very vibrant, is very well managed, and is quite aggressive in looking out for markets. So you'll find them all over the world, in China, in America, in Nigeria, in Kenya. So that's what gives South Africa the strength and the visibility. Also, our universities. South Africa has good universities which are very well run, which have good reputations. And then the NGOs. We have powerful civil societies, NGOs, trade unions. They speak truth to power. And churches, we have very powerful, well-organized churches which protect the poor in South Africa. So that's what really... So when the government is floundering, like our government is floundering, we have fallback positions with these other institutions that keep South Africa afloat.
Channels Television's Bureau Chief Betty Dibia in that interview with the political economist as South Africa marks 8 years of multiracial elections. While staying on the continent, French troops have rolled out of a remote military base in Mali, crawling across the desert as they watch for potholes and explosives. Thousands of French troops have been fighting Islamist militants in Mali for nearly a decade. France decided to withdraw them after disagreements with the military rulers who seized power in a coup last year.
Helicopters were above as air support for hundreds of troops in trucks and armored cars leaving the camp near the town of Gossi. A team of sappers led the way looking for explosives hidden in a sandy surface. Mines and improvised explosive devices aren't the only risks to the convoy, with many civilian vehicles taking part in the convoy. Potholes and road damage also concerns.
We're in the
middle of the desert with big potholes that lead to mechanical risks such as punctures or damage to vehicles. The second thing is direct enemy risks, which can be traps such as mines or improvised explosive devices. And the last risk is the civilian vehicles that are not armored, vehicles made to drive in the middle of the desert and which suffer numerous breakdowns and punctures. They can slow down the convoy, so it takes a day and a half to drive 160 kilometers in the middle of the desert.
Une base à l'extérieur en toute sécurité pour protéger tout le dispositif militaire et les convoyeurs civils qui sont avec nous.
The Gossi base, which housed between 300 and 400 troops, is little more than a walled compound surrounded by scrubland. The site was abuzz last week as they packed up generators and other kits before loading them onto trucks. The journey north to the city of Gao is 160 kilometers, but it took the slow-moving convoy a day and a half to get there.
On n'a pas en tête la belle autoroute française. Là, on est bien au milieu du désert avec tantôt des gros nids de poules.
To disengage this site, we send convoys with many civilian vehicles escorted by military vehicles. These civilian vehicles come to load all the equipment that we must take out of the Gossi base. But the Gossi base is a small base. There's not enough room to accommodate everyone. So, every time we come to this base with the convoy loads the vehicles inside the base but spends the night outside the base or spends the night in another small base outside.
Qui ralentissent l'ensemble du convoi, mais donc bien une journée et demie pour faire 160 km au milieu du désert.
This is what France's withdrawal from northern Mali looks like, painstaking and slow through hostile territory that its forces have failed to secure in 10 years of conflict. The departure from Gossi, which follows similar withdrawals from bases in Timbuktu and Kidal, is part of a staggered pullout announced by France in February, prompted by worsening violence and a breakdown in relations between the two countries. It marks the end to a mission that began in 2013 with quick successes against Islamist militants who had taken over parts of the north, but which became a quagmire, sucking in thousands of troops and billions of dollars. Over 50 French soldiers have died in Mali. As France moves out of the country, Russian mercenaries from Wagner Group have moved in, according to right groups and sources, raising concern among Western powers of a potential spike in violence. Mali and Russia have previously said there are no mercenaries in Mali, only Russian trainers helping local troops.
Away from the African continent, the usually bustling streets around the lockdown compounds in Beijing's Chaoyang district are now quiet as the capital tries to minimize the spread of the coronavirus. Beijing is testing the more than 3.5 million residents of its Chaoyang district, all of whom were screened Monday, while Tuesday 16 million from other districts were tested and are due for another round Thursday. The partial lockdown is not what migrant workers, Mr. Hu and Mrs. Wu, who just arrived to start work at a university, expected to experience. Their new workplace is next to a residential compound, which is under lockdown, and the Beijing University of Technology is also fenced off. Mrs. Wu is optimistic about her future, despite the worrying start. In total, 20 million of Beijing's population of 22 million will be tested 3 times this week. Meanwhile, over in Shanghai, Yang Ying, nicknamed Tuti, and her husband, nicknamed Mi Zhao, had been looking forward to their wedding before a resurgence of COVID-19 cases in the city derailed their plans. They had originally planned a large ceremony with about 100 of their friends and family members on the 16th of April, including some who were meant to travel from outside Shanghai. But as the coronavirus started sweeping across the city in March, authorities announced a large-scale lockdown banning social activities, including weddings. The couple decided to postpone their wedding ceremony and took few pictures on the rooftop of their residential building on the planned date. Yang, an architect and part-time swing dance teacher, said she didn't expect to do anything in particular on that day, but just wanted to have a memory. In early April, China's financial arm with 25 million was placed under lockdown with restrictions to contain COVID-19, including closing schools, shops, hotels, restaurants, cafes, intracity transport. As strict restrictions remained in place in the city, Yang and Mi volunteered to serve their building, wearing hazmat suits and scanning QR codes for residents when PCR testing was required within their compound. Away from the coronavirus, the Chinese Foreign Ministry has said remarks from Australia regarding China's new security pact with the Solomon Islands are for Canberra's political self-interest. Foreign Ministry spokesman Wang Wenbin told a regular news briefing in Beijing that some Australian politicians are accustomed to smearing China for their own political self-interest. Their remarks cannot deceive the international community or the Australian public. While details of the pact have not been disclosed, Wang said the two sides would discuss and act in accordance with international practice. Wang's comments came after Andrew Shearer, Australia's Director General of the Office of National Intelligence, said Canberra is concerned Chinese police deployed to the Solomon Islands under a new security pact could use ruthless techniques previously used to quell anti-government protests in Hong Kong. China said previously the security deal was not targeted at any third party and did not contradict the cooperation the Pacific nation has with other countries. Staying with China's foreign ministry, it's urged the United States to abide by the One China principle and stop its dangerous, provocative actions after a U.S. warship sailed through the sensitive Taiwan Strait. The U.S. Navy said the guided missile destroyer USS Sampson conducted a routine Taiwan Strait transit Tuesday in accordance with international law. The United States has been carrying out such sailings about once a month, angering China, which views them as a sign of support for Taiwan, the democratically governed island that Beijing views as Chinese territory. The People's Liberation Army's Eastern Theater Command said its forces monitored and warned the ship. Taiwan's defense ministry said the U.S. ship sailed north through the straits and that the situation in the waterway was as normal. Indonesia's palm oil smallholders have enjoyed high income over the past year due to a global price surge. But after concerns over the domestic supply led to President Joko Widodo announcing an export ban of some palm oil products from Thursday tomorrow, farmers fear they will bear the brunt of the stoppage. The world's top palm oil producer said it will ban exports of refined, bleached and deodorized palm olein, which is produced by crushing palm fruit before processing to remove impurities. This is in an effort to lower prices of domestic cooking oil. The move announced Friday evening by Jokowi, as the president is known, had already affected prices of fresh palm fruit branches in Kampar, Riau province on Indonesia's Sumatra Island. Ahmad Delami, who is a 30-year-old smallholder, said that he could still sell his palm fruit at 3,500 rupiah per kilogram, but prices were halved to 1,500 by Tuesday. He also said he was worried prices could fall even further ahead of the Islamic Eid al-Fitr holiday, which falls in early May. And so ahead on the program. 3-century-old instruments lauded as Leonardo da Vinci violins, fetching as much as 10 million euros when it is auctioned next month. We'll tell you about that and more when we return. Palestinian authorities say Israeli soldiers shot dead a Palestinian in the occupied West Bank earlier today after clashes erupted after an arrest raid. It's the second time in 2 days that forces have killed a Palestinian during a late-night incursion. According to the Israeli military, its forces apprehended 2 suspects in what it described as counter-terrorism activities in the city of Jenin. Subsequently, it said dozens of Palestinians threw rocks and explosive devices and opened fire at the soldiers who responded with live ammunition. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry has condemned the raid, saying the man who was killed, identified as Ahmad Masad, was summarily executed. In recent times, Israel has stepped up incursions in the West Bank following a string of deadly Palestinian and Arab attacks, which killed 14 people in the country, including 3 police officers. In other news, Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has condemned the terrorist attack inside a university in the country's southern port city of Karachi, vowing to bring the perpetrators to justice. Mr. Sharif was at the Chinese embassy in Islamabad Tuesday to express his deep condolences. The explosion during the day had ripped through a shuttle passenger van of the Confucius Institute at the University of Karachi, leaving 3 Chinese teachers killed and 1 Chinese teacher injured. Pakistan, he says, condemned terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, adding that such vicious acts against the all-weather strategic cooperative partnership between Pakistan and China will never dent the iron brotherhood between the 2 countries, nor hinder bilateral cooperation.
This shall not happen, and this will not happen. offer our deep condolences to the government of China and the people of China, and convey our sincere sympathies to the bereaved families. I want to assure you, on my behalf and on behalf of the government of Pakistan and the people of Pakistan, that we will hunt down these perpetrators, culprits, killers, and will not rest until we have caught them and given them exemplary punishment. Now, additional measures to cover and protect the lives of our Chinese friends wherever they are in Pakistan. And tomorrow our Interior Minister is flying to Karachi to assist our government in Sindh and provide them any help from the federal government.
And to France, where re-elected French President Emmanuel Macron has vowed to address poorer populations and unemployment. He made the promise as he visited a market in the Paris suburb of Cergy today, where he was welcomed by cheers from supporters rejoicing his re-election. He says he plans to change policies that tend to place poor people into already poor neighborhoods, an aspect he admitted he was unable to change in his first presidential mandate. Critics say French people are still suffering a lot with unemployment high rates. French consumer confidence fell more than expected in April, although households' concerns about inflation in the coming month eased, this according to a monthly survey. President Macron, who gets another 5 years in office to make the change, says he aims to reduce unemployment in less privileged neighborhoods that often fall victim to discrimination and lower quality education. And £10 million, that's how much this violin, believed to have belonged to Italian polymath Leonardo da Vinci, could fetch when it is auctioned next month. Crafted in 1736 by revered Italian luthier Giuseppe Guarani, it is owned by virtuous Regis Pasquier, and its sound has graced concert halls around the world. The maple-backed instrument is one of about 150 made by Guarani, the quality and longevity of whose output rivals that of Antonio Stradivari, who was far less prolific than his compatriot and contemporary. Made at the peak of Guarani's career, it was bought more than 20 years ago by Pasquier, who gave a concert with it following day without even practicing on it. And this, they say for him, that the instrument was perfect. The violin will go up for auction June 3rd following a 3-day viewing. Its base price estimate is 4 to 4.5 million euros, but it is expected to sell for as high as 10 million euros. Isn't that amazing? And the far south of Madagascar has repeatedly struggled with food shortages due to a combination of drought, land erosion caused by strong winds, and deforestation and extreme poverty. But now, for farmers like Kazi, pigeon peas, a staple crop in India, has provided a solution. Take a look.
Growing edible crops used to be so hard for Kazi Zanapijo in drought-prone southern Madagascar that she would often have nothing but wild plants and cactuses to feed herself and her children. Until she started growing pigeon peas.
I used to plant other things, but they didn't grow. Since I started planting pigeon peas, I've harvested a lot. It's what allowed me to feed my 10 children.
The plants, which look like thin shrubs and grow to about waist height, provide not only pulses that are good to eat, but also woody branches that can be sold at the market as kindling. The far south of Madagascar has repeatedly struggled with food shortages because of a combination of drought, land erosion caused by strong winds and deforestation, as well as extreme poverty. Climate scientists say the rains will become even scarcer and less predictable in future. Pigeon peas are a staple in India, but in southern Madagascar, subsistence farmers have traditionally grown maize and sweet corns. Zana Pijo and her family were able to make enough money to build a rainwater reservoir for the village.
My family and I built this rainwater reservoir. We used to have to walk to the coast to get water. It was very far and tiring. When we started to sell pigeon peas, we decided to build this reservoir.
As a first step, farmers are encouraged to plant only pigeon peas in neat rows perpendicular to the direction of the wind. With pigeon peas, Zana Pijo now grows sorghum, maize, wheat and watermelons despite the drought.
You can watch this program again on our YouTube channel and take a look at top stories on our website. It's channelstv.com. That's the world today. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Nwaka. Have a good evening.